The life of Jeremiah Liver-Eating Johnson is a tale interwoven with the rugged and unforgiving landscapes of the American West. From his tumultuous beginnings as a deserter from the U.S. Navy, to his storied career as a mountain man, sharpshooting lawman, and frontier legend, Johnson's journey encapsulates the brutality and resilience of the era. His exploits, shrouded in both fact and myth, reveal a man who navigated a changing wilderness, forged unlikely alliances, and became a symbol of frontier justice and vengeance. This account delves into the life of Liver-Eating Johnson, including his infamous vendetta against the Crow tribe, and the enduring legacy that continues to captivate our collective imagination. Record keeping in the 1800s was inconsistent, but historians of the Old West estimate that Liver-Eating Johnson, originally named John Jeremiah Garrison, was born on July 1, 1824, in Little York, Hunterdon County, New Jersey. However, he didn't stay there for long. Once he moved on, Johnson grew into an imposing figure, standing at 6 foot 2 inches and weighing around 260 pounds. Notably taller and heavier than the average man of his time, who was typically around 5 foot 6 inches. At the onset of the Mexican-American War, Johnson left home as a teenager to join the Navy, despite being underage. He served on a warship until an incident where he struck an officer. The reasons behind this altercation remain unclear, but it certainly marked a turning point in his life. When the ship docked, Johnson decided to flee rather than face potential punishment from the Navy. He believed he would fare better surviving in the wilderness of the West than in a military prison. To evade capture, he changed his name to John Johnson and moved far from his origins. Despite his efforts to hide, Johnson's large stature made it difficult for him to go unnoticed. He used his size and strength to work as a woodhawk, supplying wood for steamboats. After dabbling in a shipbuilding career, he finally made it to the Montana Territory, where rumors of gold captivated the young man's dreams, just like the dreams of countless men during the Old West era. Johnson specifically picked out Alder Gulch, Montana, where the gold digging was a way of life, unlike any other life he'd witnessed before. When the allure of shimmering gold finally wore off, Johnson decided his true calling on the frontier was that of a mountain man. Aspiring to live as a trapper and hunter, he needed to acquire essential survival skills. He met Old John Hatcher, a renowned mountain man who took him under his wing. Hatcher, a well-known figure despite his reclusive lifestyle, invited Johnson to his cabin along the Little Snake River in northern Colorado. There, Hatcher taught him crucial survival techniques, such as hunting, using a hawk and rifle, starting campfires with sticks, and avoiding dangerous wildlife like bears and rattlesnakes. Johnson also learned to set traps, collect furs, and trade for supplies, proving to be an excellent student. It was circa 1847 when Old John Hatcher decided to retire from his life as a mountain man and headed east, bidding adieu to his apprentice. Left alone, Johnson sought companionship and desired a wife. The previous year, while exploring the Bitterroot Valley in Montana, Johnson had become acquainted with the Flathead Indian tribe. An assistant chief from the tribe had offered his daughter in exchange for some furs, which appeared to be a reasonable trade to Johnson. When Hatcher made his future known, Johnson trekked back to the Bitterroot Valley to see if the offer remained. It did, and soon Johnson and his new bride were journeying back to his cabin along the Little Snake River. By the first signs of autumn, the couple settled into their cabin. Over the next few weeks, Johnson stocked the cabin with ample food and supplies for his wife, as he needed to leave her alone for the entire winter while he went fur trapping. He taught her how to use his rifle for self-defense, and in return, she taught him to speak in her native Salish tongue. Unbeknownst to Johnson, she also became pregnant at around the same time. Confident she would be safe, he departed with a solemn vow to return the following spring. When Johnson returned to the cabin several weeks later, though, he was met with a horrific scene. The door of the now burnt and smoldering cabin stood wide open, revealing the skeletal remnants of his wife, who had been exposed to the harsh winter elements and hungry wildlife. From the evidence, Johnson deduced that she had been killed by members of the Crow tribe, another demographic of Native Americans from the region. Among the remains, he discovered a small, delicate skull beneath his wife's ribcage, revealing that she had been pregnant when she was murdered. Overcoming with a seething fury and unmatched frenzy, Johnson promised to avenge her death and left his abode to track down and slay the responsible tribal members. The murder of Johnson's wife and unborn child not only enraged him, but drastically altered his path in life. Soon after, the bodies of scalped Crow warriors began appearing throughout the region, both fellow tribesmen and white mountain men finding them. These victims were not just scalped, but also had their livers removed. As the number of these grisly discoveries grew, other mountain men deduced that Johnson was on a vengeful killing spree against the Crow tribe. It became clear that Johnson was the one responsible, and he was actually consuming the Crow livers. Historians estimate that liver-eating Johnson killed over 300 Crow during his decade-long rampage. Eventually, the Crow chiefs, frustrated by their losses, formed an elite group of their 20 strongest warriors to track down and eliminate Johnson. However, none of these warriors ever returned, leading to the theory that they fell to Johnson as well. In Crow culture, the liver is essential for entering the afterlife. By consuming his victims' livers, Johnson not only ended their lives on Earth, but also condemned their spirits. His actions struck terror into the minds and souls of the Crow, leaving a lasting legacy of fear and violence. Biographers Raymond Thorpe and Robert Bunker, in their book Crow Killer, claim that Johnson's killing spree was driven by a love of killing. They recounted a specific moment where he poisoned and killed 29 Blackfeet warriors with strychnine-laced biscuits as a macabre form of entertainment. One particular legend, possibly inspired by such a tale, describes Johnson's daring escape from a group of Blackfoot warriors. During a winter journey of over 500 miles to sell whiskey to the Flathead tribe, Johnson was ambushed by the Blackfoot, who intended to sell him to the Crow. Stripped to the waist and tied with leather cords, Johnson was left under the guard of one warrior in a teepee. He managed to break free, knock out the guard with a kick, and scalped him with the guard's own knife. He even cut off the guard's leg, later smoking the flesh into jerky. Johnson then escaped into the woods, eventually reaching the cabin of his trapping partner, Del Gue, after a grueling 200-mile journey. At that point in history, the West was undergoing significant changes. The buffalo population was dwindling, fur trapping stopped due to the loss of beaver, and much of the large game that had once roamed the land was no longer abundant. Native tribes faced devastation as their lands were taken and their people were forced onto reservations. After a quarter-century of relentless conflict with the Crow, Johnson and the tribe finally made peace. When Johnson and the Crow eventually reconciled, the tribe did a complete 180 degrees, considering him as one of their own. His long-standing feud with them, which had claimed many lives, came to an official end. However, the West remained a bloody and contested region, especially during the Plains Indian Wars of the mid-19th century. Numerous Native Americans from various tribes, particularly the Sioux and the Blackfoot, continued to encounter the fierce resistance of Tupac Psa-Ruka, translated to Crow Killer in English, along with his fellow mountain men. Johnson embraced this rugged life of a mountain man, even after his tour of vengeance was over, mainly hunting and trapping to earn a living, and occasionally selling whiskey. In 1864, he signed with the 2nd Colorado Cavalry as a sharpshooter for the Union Army in St. Louis. It seemed that his desertion from the U.S. Navy was either overlooked or the Union Army was truly in dire need of soldiers. When the Civil War concluded in 1865, Johnson received an honorable discharge. Returning to the West, Johnson utilized his tracking acumen as an Army scout during the Indian Wars. He then became deputy sheriff in Colson, Montana, and Leadville, Colorado, eventually serving as the town marshal of Red Lodge, Montana. He also started an amateur Wild West show, traveling with Calamity Jane and sharing stories of his misadventures and conflicts with Native Americans. In an article published at the beginning of 1878, the Washington Post mistakenly reported Johnson's death, describing him as a vicious frontiersman who killed Native Americans for sport or revenge. Other newspapers picked up on his nefarious nickname, Liver-Eating Johnson, and detailed his supposed acts as disgusting displays of cannibalism. Johnson's legend became so entwined with violent mythology that separating truth from fiction became impossible. He may have been caught in the web of his own exaggerated stories, too, eventually revising his own accounts of how he earned his gruesome moniker in newspaper interviews. In his golden years, Johnson wandered to the Golden State, a place far removed from his wilderness roots. Ironically, the man known for avoiding civilization spent his final days in the Los Angeles Old Soldiers' Home in Southern California. He died penniless on January 21, 1900, at the age of 76, and was buried in a military cemetery in LA. For 75 years, he remained there as the City of Angels grew up around him. In 1972, the film Jeremiah Johnson, starring Robert Redford as the eponymous leading man, renewed interest in his life. At the time, his resting place sat adjacent to the San Diego freeway, the concrete jungle, a complete antithesis to the life and legacy of Liver-Eating Johnson. 2 years later, after a campaign led by a teacher and 25 7th grade students, Johnson's remains were moved to Cody, Wyoming, near the Shoshone River, a much more fitting resting place for a legendary mountain man. His epitaph reads, "No more trails." Throughout his life, Johnson took on various roles to survive, including sailor, scout, soldier, gold seeker, hunter, trapper, wood supplier, whiskey seller, guide, deputy, constable, and log cabin builder. He built his own folklore, filled with stories that would become larger than life itself, a microcosm of the Old West and the American frontier at large.